I'm due to start there on the 1st of next month. We chatted until the cocktail party ended and David walked me to my room. He kissed me on the cheek and I returned one to him. Honey, I went in, stripped then pleased myself, thinking about him. I am sorry. The next night after our classes, they had a formal dinner, and as I walked in with Dr. Shah, David was standing at the entrance and taking my arm asked, "Would you mind if I joined you two beautiful ladies for dinner tonight?" We walked over to the seating chart and somehow, his name had been inserted between Dr. Shah and me. Dinner was surprisingly good, then they had the usual speeches and introductions. David was called up and introduced. He was one of the developers of this new operating robot. He returned and soon they were clearing off tables and making room as the band set up and the tables were moved to the edge of the room. David took my hand and said, "This place is going to be too crowded. Follow me." He took me into the hotel's lounge where a three-piece combo was playing and we sat in a back booth. When the waitress came over and asked what I wanted to drink, David said, "2 chocolate martinis, please." I smiled and said to him, "How do you know I like chocolate martinis?" He smiled and said, "Any woman so beautiful and sweet must like chocolate martinis." Then he took my chin and pulled me into a soft kiss on the lips. It was so gentle and sent goosebumps all over. The waitress brought our drinks as the band began playing a slow song, and he pulled me up and we started to dance. I barely came up to his vest pocket. He's 6 feet 7 inches, and you know I'm only 5 feet 8 inches, and with my 2-inch heels I was still short. David melted into me as we glided across the dance floor. We must have danced 3 or 4 dances before we went back to our booth and finished our drinks as 2 more quickly appeared. I looked at him and said, "Are you trying to get me drunk so you can have your way with me?" He smiled those perfect white teeth at me and said, "Not really. When I make love to you, I want you to be fully aware and to be able to enjoy every second of it." As he kissed my hand then sucked my fingers. Felt sensation. We danced a couple of more times before I told him I needed to get some sleep. I had planned on calling you that night, but when I looked, it was already past 1 o'clock, so I figured you would be asleep. Again, David walked me to my room. Only this time when we kissed, it wasn't a kiss on the cheek, but our lips met firmly. Then our tongues began to dart together as he pulled me to him. God, Michael, part of me wanted him, so it wasn't funny, but he moved away and said, "Good night, sweet Kelly. I'll see you tomorrow." He then turned and headed towards the elevator. I again pleased myself so hard and fast until I fell asleep that morning. Speaking of morning, I had overslept my first class when I heard someone knocking at my door. I was still naked as I had just thrown everything off when I came in so I could please myself. I grabbed my sweatshirt and threw it on, thinking it was Dr. Shah. Imagine my surprise to see David pushing a cart filled with breakfast goodies. He was wearing a white t-shirt, shorts, and tennis shoes. My sweatshirt just barely covered my kitty, so I quickly moved back and sat on the edge of the bed, pulling the hem of the shirt down. Michael smiled and said, "Phew, those are killer legs, Kelly." Then he pushed the cart over to me and piled food onto my plate. We were almost finished when I felt his socked foot rubbing up against my calf. At first, I thought I should move, but I couldn't. His foot kept going higher and higher as he ate like nothing was happening. I was having trouble eating. He would rub one side of my thigh then the other side. I found myself spreading my thighs and moving my butt closer to the edge of the bed. Soon his long foot was lightly brushing my kitty, teasing me, and I orgasmed. Honey, I damn near shoved that cart away and wanted to screw him on the floor right there. David removed his foot and slipped his shoes back on and stood up. His shorts were tinted with what was the largest tool I have ever seen. Well, the outline was. David started to move the cart towards the door and asked, "Kelly, do you have a very nice dress to go to the goodbye ball tonight?" I told him no, as I really didn't know this was going to be a fancy affair. He smiled and said, "Can you be ready in an hour? I'm taking you shopping." An hour later I was dressed and still tingling from his foot job. He was dressed very smartly in a sports coat, Dockers, and penny loafers. I had on a cashmere button-up sweater, silk pedal pushers, and my 2-inch heels. David walked me out to his big Mercedes, and we drove away. He took me to a lovely boutique where I tried on several dresses for him, but none met with his approval. Then we went to Dillard's where I tried on more dresses and shoes. David did like a pair of red patent leather 5-inch strappy heels and bought them for me. I told him I could buy my own, but he insisted. He still couldn't find a dress he liked. Then we went to Saks Fifth Avenue, and he had me try on several more dresses as he told the salesgirl, "Sweetheart, I'm looking for a little black dress for my date that oozes sex. Do you have anything like that?" She looked around and said, "Sir, you should take her to Lucchese and tell them what you are looking for. I'm sure they have, or can make you up what you want. Please don't tell my manager I told you this, as it could cost me my job." As soon as we walked into Lucchese, I knew this was the place. Their dresses were so very beautiful, and this young man came up and asked, "How can we help you today? Are you looking for a wedding dress?" I laughed and David said, "No, this is Kelly, my date, and I want her to be the sexiest lady at the ball. I want her to have a little black dress to end all LBDs. Do you have anything that can fit the bill?" He looked at me and said, "Honey, if we don't it, I'm sure we can throw something together for her post-haste." David said, "The dance is tonight." The salesman's eyes went wide and he said, "Well, let's get this show on the road, shall we?" He ushered us into a fitting room, then brought us in a pitcher of wine and 2 glasses, and after filling them left. About 15 minutes later, he returned with a young lady close on his heels. He had 3 dresses in his arms, and she had 2. They hung them up and he said, "Darling, you can't try them on with clothes on." So I kicked off my shoes, pulled down my pants, then unbuttoned and took off my sweater. The salesman tapped his foot and said, "These dresses aren't made for bras either." He wanted me to remove my bra. David was eyeing me up and down, and I could see his manhood rising as he did. The salesman asked, "Sweetie, do you want him to leave so you can try these on properly?" I looked at David, then calling upon all my courage, I said, "I don't think so. David is the one paying for my dress, and he's the one that has to approve of it. He stays." I thought the first 3 dresses looked fantastic, but David wanted to see them all. I damn near had to be poured into the 4th dress, but I'll have to admit, it was the sexiest one I had ever seen. David's eyes lit up and he said, "We'll take it." The salesman asked, "Sir, don't you want to know how much it is?" David was almost drooling and said, "Whatever it costs, it's worth it." The 2 of them left, and the young lady helped me out of it in dress. David pulled into the parking lot of a fancy jewelry shop and ushered me in. We walked over to the counter where the pearls were, and he began looking them over. This older gentleman came over and said, "May I help you?" David said, "Yes, sir. I'm looking for a pearl necklace for my girl here and matching earrings." The old guy pulled out a couple of trays of necklaces, and I started trying them on, and David kept shaking his head no. Finally, in desperation, he reached over and unbuttoned my top 3 buttons and loosely held the longest strand, saying, "I want something that will show off these beauties." His mouth hung open for a moment, then he got a big smile. He put back the trays and locked the cabinet and asked us to wait. He went into the back and came out with 3 black cases. "These I keep in the safe," he said, and as he opened them, there were these absolutely gorgeous long pearl necklaces. The cheapest one was $5,900. He picked it up and handed it to David. He placed it over my head, and it hung down over my breasts just as David had wanted. David was nodding and said, "Let's see the others," as he took the first one off and laid it into its case. The second one had 2 strands and a set of earrings with 4 pearls each. David unclasped that one and hooked it around my neck, then took the earrings and handed them to me. I removed the studs I had worn and put those pearl ones in and went to look in the mirror. Wow was all I could think. I guess the smile on my face must have affected David, because as soon as he saw it, he told the old guy, "We'll take it," and handed him his credit card. I walked over to him and grabbing his arm and said, "David, you can't keep spending money on me like this. It isn't right. I feel like you're trying to buy me. I'm not a hooker. Please tell the gentleman you have changed your mind." Just then the old guy walked over with David's receipt and his card. David signed it and said, "Sorry, too late. It's yours now." He took me back to the hotel, and I went in my room and cried. Then I remembered that I hadn't called you, so I did, and you were so happy to hear me. I really felt guilty then, looking at the new dress and the case with the pearls. As you were finishing up, you said, "Honey, I'm glad you're having fun. Relax and enjoy yourself. Remember, you only live once." God, Michael. It was like you were telling me to go ahead and screw David. I showered, then headed down to the hotel's beauty salon and had them do my hair, give me a manicure and add some long red nails, do a pedicure with matching red polish, and told them to give me a Brazilian wax job. I wanted David to have something special to remember me by. I was pleased with my look and tipped them all nicely. I went to my room and stripped and put on the dress. I slipped on those tall red heels and found that they were a lot harder to walk in than I had thought. Luckily, I had 2 hours before David was supposed to be here, so I took my room key and cell phone and headed out the door. I walked up and down the corridor for a while, then hit the elevator and walked around the lobby. Damn, I was hit on by at least a dozen men or more. 3 times security asked me for my room card. Finally, I asked the older one why I was being challenged for my room key, and he said, "To be honest, miss, when a girl dressed as sexy as you are, she's usually a hooker and we have to chase them out. I'm not calling you a hooker. I'm just saying that you are very hot looking and I hope your husband will be down soon to fend off all the wolves that want to drag you up to their rooms." Just being curious, I sauntered into the lounge, shaking my bum a little more than I normally do, and almost every man in there took notice of me as I walked up to the bar and asked for a chocolate martini. 3 men surrounded me saying, "I'll pay for that," or "add it to my tab." Introductions were made, and they wanted to know what I was doing in there. I said that I was thirsty and just came down for a quick drink. Soon there were 4 or 5 chocolate martinis in front of me, so we kept talking and I kept drinking. I'm not sure how many I had put down when my cell phone started buzzing, and it was David. He was up at my room and was looking for me. I told him I was in the bar and giggled and told him my new friends were buying me chocolate martinis. He was down there in a flash. He looked at the guys and told them something, I'm not sure what, as I was having trouble navigating or hearing, and the 3 of them took off in a flash. He looked at me and asked, "What the hell do you think you were doing?" I said, "Sweetheart, I was trying to be able to walk better in these heels, and the security guard told me that I was turning on every guy in the hotel and being curious. I came in here. I was only going to have 1 drink, then go back to my room to wait for you. Then these 3 guys came over and kept buying me drinks. We were talking and I'm not sure how many I drank. How do I look?" David shook his head, then said, "I think the security guard was right, but we really need to get some food in you right now. Did you have any lunch?" I shook my head no, and he took me to a booth and told the waitress to bring us 2 cheeseburgers with fries and chocolate shakes. I didn't think I was hungry, but I did manage to eat half of the lunch, and the chocolate shake really hit the spot. By the time we had finished, I had pretty much sobered up and I apologized to David. We went to the goodbye festivities and had missed the dinner, which I heard was terrible anyway. Overdone chicken, you know. The dancing had just begun. My new shoes brought me up closer to David's face, and kissing him was a lot easier. I was rubbing myself hard on his steel-like shaft, hard enough that I had several very nice orgasms as we French kissed. The band said they were done for the night, and David took my hand, grabbed my room key and cell phone. We were making out in the elevator. We got into my room, and I yanked my dress off and stood there and almost tore off his clothes until he was just in his boxers. He held me and we kissed again. He said, "Kelly, are you really ready to cheat on Michael? Forsaking your wedding vows. I'm falling in love with you, and I'm worried that you may be falling for me. If I make love to you, I will do my best to break up your marriage. Is that what you want?" It was like someone had hit me up the side of my head with a brick. I turned on my side and began crying. David pulled the covers over me, then laid down next to me and comforted me. "Kelly, that was the single most difficult thing I have ever done. I want you to think it over and be sure. If you want out of your marriage with Michael, I'm here for you. I don't think he would put up with sharing you, would he?" I shook my head. Oh God, what had I done? I thought. I turned to him and gave him a quick kiss on the lips and told him, "David, please go before I really do something stupid." "Michael, do you hate me?" she asked. Trying to keep from yelling, I said, "Kelly, you said that you didn't cheat or have sex, yet you stood naked in front of him and played with his huge tool, said you gave him B-job, then let him eat you to several orgasms. That's oral sex. It's sex. Goddamn it. You didn't stop him. He stopped you. Now you tell me that he's moving to our town and going to be working with you? Are you going to be screwing him on the side, or should we just get divorced?" She was crying now and said, "Michael, I don't think it was cheating. I have these urges that I can't explain. Do you think you could allow me to see him once in a while to get this out of my system?" I was incensed, and though not yelling, I was rather loud and said, "So you want my permission to go screw this hung black doctor while I sit at home twiddling my thumbs? Is that it? How would you feel if I had asked you if I could screw some young chick while you sat at home, or we're at work. Would you give me permission? Kelly looked at me, then said, "It depends on if you gave me permission to." "Screw you, Kelly." I yelled, "That's not the point. I mean, before this, you already told me that he wants a permanent relationship with you. He wants to break up our marriage so he can have you for himself." Kelly looked at me and said, "That's never going to happen, Michael." Shaking my head, I said, "Oh, it will if I find out you have screwed him. It's about to happen with what you already did with him. I have never cheated or even wanted to cheat on you, and now I find out you have done this with this David fellow. What did you expect to happen when you told me? That I'd tell you to bring him home so I could watch him screw you in our bed?" Kelly said, "Well, I had hoped you might like that. I know you like interracial porn. This would be your own personal version with upfront seating." I looked at her and said, "Kelly James Grant, are you out of your mind?" She began crying and left the bedroom, grabbing her nightgown on the way out. My wife of 22 years had just told me after returning from a 2-week training seminar in Dallas that she wanted to have an affair with a black doctor and had invited him to her room, gotten naked in front of him, played with his tool, and begged him to screw her, but he had questioned her true intentions, and she reluctantly backed out. I was in turmoil and sick to my stomach. After she left, there was a knock at my door and I said, "Come in," and in walked Alicia, our daughter. She asked, "Daddy, is it true that Mom wants you to allow her to have sex with a black man and that she already let him go down on her?" She rushed to me and threw her arms around me. "I'm sorry. I heard you two talking and I was listening at the door. Are you going to divorce her? Do you think marriage counseling might help? I know my English teacher caught his wife in bed with their black neighbor and he divorced her. Only she moved in with him as soon as he filed for divorce. What is it with white women and black men?" I hugged her and said, "Honey, a lot of black men have very big and long tools, and some women like them better than guys that are built normally." Alicia surprised me when she said, "Oh, Daddy, I know several white guys with tools just as big as black dudes have." Then she realized what she S1A'd and shut up. I asked, "From personal experience?" She looked down, then shook her head no, then said, "From some of my girlfriends, and they have shown me pictures from their phones. I don't feel right discussing my sex life with my father." I smiled and said, "Honey, I will never judge you or go beat up your boyfriend. That is unless he mistreats my angel. You can feel free to discuss anything with me that you have with your mother. Please don't think you have to keep secrets from me." Then I gave her a big hug. Then she left, and I tried to get some sleep, but I did have trouble. When I woke late that morning, Kelly was already gone and her note said she had gone to work, which was weird because she wasn't due to work today. I called her office and they told me that today was her day off. My heart sank. Now she was lying to me. I drove over to County General and circled it several times but didn't see her car. I pulled out, but instead of heading left towards home, I went right. As I went down the boulevard, I passed this restaurant that Kelly and I liked, and there was her Explorer next to a black Mercedes. I almost flattened 2 of his tires and disabled her engine, but instead walked in and saw them in a back booth, holding hands across the table. I asked the waitress if the bar was open, and she said yes. I handed her a $10 bill and asked her to bring me a double bourbon and Coke, tall. I pointed to where I'd be sitting. Then I marched over to Kelly and plunked my bum down next to her, which surprised the shit out of her. She was at a loss for words as I extended my hand and said, "David, I presume. I'm Michael, Kelly's husband, at least for the time being, probably not much longer." The waitress brought my drink and my first taste halfway emptied the glass. So far, neither of them had said a word. Then Kelly asked, "Michael, how did you find us?" I smiled and said, "I have my spies," not wanting her to know actually how I found them. David finally spoke and said, "It's nice to meet you, Michael. Kelly has nothing but nice things to say about you." I turned to face Kelly and said, "Yeah, but it's too bad. I'm not tall, dark, handsome, and hung like she's looking for." Kelly gasped and began crying. David stood and said he needed to get going. I asked him to stay so we could talk, but he put a $20 bill on the table and walked out. Kelly was huddled in the corner of the booth and I asked her, "Why did you lie to me?" "I didn't lie," she said. "That's funny because your note said you were going into work today, but when I called, they told me it was your day off and they hadn't seen you," I said. Her lip quivered and she began crying. Kelly said through her sniffles, David texted me asking to meet to talk, and I knew you wouldn't believe me, so I left that note. I knew you were mad at me already, and I didn't want to add fuel to the fire. I downed the second half of my drink, then said, Kelly, we need to talk at home. I'm going to follow you there. Let's get out of here. We headed out with me on her tail. 3 times Kelly went through a yellow light late, but I stayed with her, catching the red twice. I wasn't letting her get away. Each time I could see her craning her neck to see if I was still behind her. We got home, and we sat down at the kitchen table, and I got us both bottles of water. Kelly was as nervous as a cat on a hot tin roof. I smiled and said, so I take it you still want him. I guess that means I'm going to have to file for divorce, doesn't it? Kelly, I can't take your lying to me. She started to howl and said, no, Michael, I don't want a divorce. I love you. Can't you understand that I need to find out what's driving this itch inside of me? Don't you care about my feelings? Don't you love me anymore? Shaking my head, I said, my sweet darling, I have loved you ever since I first saw you that first day in high school. When we got married, we made a vow to be faithful to each other until death do us part, remember? Well, dear, I'm not dead and don't plan on it for quite some time. It seems that you can't say the same. You say you love me, but if you did, you wouldn't want to go have sex with David. You never would have allowed him to see you naked or have oral sex with you. I thought maybe I could forgive you that, and then today, I find you lying to me and find you with him, probably plotting to meet up with him for sex, if I'm not mistaken. Kelly was wringing her hands and looking at the table for several minutes, then finally looked up at me, saying, Michael, it was nothing like that. We were just talking. David wanted to know how I was doing, and if I had told you what we had done. When I told him that I had, he wanted to know your reaction, and I had told him that you threatened to divorce me if we had sex. He smiled and said to me, well, then that would make it that much easier for you to become my wife. That's about the time you sat down next to me, Kelly said, trying to not look at me. I looked straight into her eyes and said, Kelly, I honestly don't believe you. I feel that you are going to go ahead and have sex with him no matter what I say, aren't you? Then I added, or have you already? She didn't answer me. She just hung her head, looking at her hands. Fine, I guess that's my answer, isn't it? I said as I got up. Just then Alicia stepped into the kitchen and said, Dad, I don't think Kelly wants to be a part of our family anymore. It seems all she wants is her black lover instead of her family. Dad, just let her go. We can get along fine without the witch. Kelly jumped up and was going to hit Alicia, and I grabbed her arm before she could. Then she yelled at her, saying, How dare you call me Kelly instead of Mom? I'm your mother, and don't you forget it, young lady. It was everything I could do to hold her back from Alicia, as I had both wrists held tightly. Alicia said, Since you think you can go screw some hung black man and have my father willingly take you back, you must be brain dead. In fact, to me you are dead. You are no longer my mother. To me you're a 304, so I'll call you Kelly instead of 304, or should I just use the terms? Now Kelly was really pulling, trying to get at Alicia, but I held her wrists firmly. Alicia looked at me and said, Let her loose, Dad. I can take care of her. Remember, I have 4 years of judo and karate under my belt. Let's see if she can take me. That seemed to take the fight out of Kelly, and she relaxed and began to sob uncontrollably. Alicia turned and walked out, and I followed. I had to go to work. As soon as I got in, I was summoned to the conference room where the board of directors was meeting. It seems my 2 junior partners had convinced the board that we should purchase Evergreen Industries. The owner was wanting to retire. He was the sole owner and was willing to take cash down to pay off the 50 acres he was buying in Montana and a new 4x4 truck, plus stocks in our company. He owned 4 plants in the greater Seattle area, and the board wanted me to go with the 2 junior partners to visit all 4 plants and make decisions as to what we were going to do with those plants, upgrade, downsize, or sell. I really didn't want to leave right now, especially with Kelly's infatuation with David, and tried to beg off, but they insisted. I tried to call Kelly, but her cell phone went immediately to voicemail. Then I called Alicia and gave her the news. She said, No, Daddy. That will give her just the opportunity she wants. As soon as you leave, you know she's going to jump into bed with him, don't you? There's not much I can do about that, honey, I said. I feel your mother has already made up her mind. She thinks that it's not really cheating, that it's just an itch she needs to scratch. Only that itch has torn our marriage to pieces, and I don't think it can ever be put back together. What do you think? I could hear my daughter sniffling as she said, Daddy, couldn't you have her committed or something? Maybe get her doctor to force her into counseling? She has to be crazy to throw your marriage out the window after all these years together. There was a long pause, then she asked, Daddy, you've never cheated on her, have you? I answered, No, honey, the few times I was tempted, but I always thought of my beautiful wife and never strayed. And the longer we were married, the easier it was to say no to temptation. I really had planned on growing old with your mother. How long are you going to be gone? She asked. Most of next week, unfortunately. We leave Sunday afternoon and don't return until Saturday mid-morning. I told my daughter, Daddy, no, you know she's going to use that opportunity to screw him, don't you? She cried. I said, Probably. I won't know unless I hire a private investigator or something. Alicia said, Don't worry, Daddy. I'll be watching her every chance I get. It was Thursday, and I really wasn't into working, so I told my secretary that I was leaving for the day. As I was about to pull out of our parking lot, I remembered that Alicia loved the root beer float ice cream from the little specialty ice cream shop about 2 blocks away, so I made a left instead of my usual right. I was about to pull in when I saw a store just before the ice cream shop that caught my eye. I'd seen it before, but hadn't really paid it much attention before. It was called I Spy, Toys That Tell It All. I pulled into their parking lot and stepped inside. The place was full of all sorts of exotic cameras and things to spy on people. The salesman, a guy about my age, came up and said, Hi, I'm Tony. Let me guess, you think your wife is cheating on you and you want to find out for sure? Right. I looked at him and said, Are you a mind reader too? He laughed and said, Nope, I've just seen the look on too many men like you before. It's terrible that in this day and age, it's the wives that have taken to cheating on their husbands a lot more than the other way around. On the plus side, it sure keeps my bank account happy. He smiled as he patted his cash register. He showed me a lot of things, but what I settled on was 4 motion-activated micro cameras that sent their signal to a receiver that would tie it to my computer and also to the cloud so I could access them at any time. I also bought a GPS tracker for Kelly's car and a program that I could install on Kelly's phone if she hadn't changed her password, so that I would get copies of all her incoming and outgoing texts and phone calls saved to the cloud also. He also recommended a battery backup with a couple of solar panels in case of power loss. I figured what the hell, as he gave me a discount for the entire package. As I was paying for them, the salesman looked at my debit card and asked, Mr. Grant, do you have a beautiful blonde daughter named Alicia? I was taken aback but nodded yes. Do you know that she was in here when I opened this morning and bought several cameras herself? She said something about catching her skank mother. She didn't seem very happy about what was going on. Let me get you the frequency her cameras are on so that you can add them to your iCloud account. I stood there while he wrote the information down on my instruction booklet. I said goodbye and headed home. Alicia was there and I walked up and gave her a big hug, then asked her, Honey, just so we don't duplicate ourselves, tell me where you hid your cameras? Her face had a shocked look for a second, then she broke into laughter and pulled me around and showed me where she had placed them. I added mine to a few other places, and then my daughter said, You know, Dad, I'd bet we could make a couple of pretty good private investigators. Don't you? As she bumped me with her hip. That night Kelly got home late again, showered, and went straight to bed, saying she had a very rough day with 3 surgeries back to back. She crawled into our bed, so I went into the guest bedroom, at least for the first hour. I then got up and retrieved her phone from her purse from the kitchen counter where she normally throws it. She had changed her password, damn her. So I tried her birthday, no luck, our anniversary, then James's birthday, then Alicia's. Then I remembered her parents' anniversary and bingo, it opened. I plugged her phone into my computer and uploaded the program into her phone. It took me almost 45 minutes for me to do all the updates and configure it so I could get it sent to my phone, my computer, and the cloud. Then I shut her phone off, wiped it down, put it back in her purse, then took the GPS out to her car and placed it in her trunk, behind her spare tire. I then went back to the guest bedroom and tried to get some sleep. Kelly was gone when I got up, so I called her and got her voicemail. I asked her to call me when she got a chance. I went to work, but my head wasn't really into it. At lunchtime, I told my secretary that I needed to go home and pack for the trip. That was just an excuse because all my mind was seeing was images of Kelly and David in her hotel room with her naked, and asking him to screw her. God, what happened to the woman I had loved for half my life? I got into my car, then headed to my bank, and after pulling half out, I took my name off our joint account. I left Kelly's debit card activated, but canceled her credit card. I then pulled 80% of the money out of our savings account and had them issue me a cashier's check. I was the only one putting money into it since we opened it. I took it to another bank and opened a new account. I called my old friend and former lawyer, Ben Foster, and went over to his house. I explained my situation, and he kept shaking his head and couldn't believe Kelly could do something like this. I signed a quitclaim deed and sold him 99% of my shares in the company for $1 with a side stipulation that once this was over, I could buy it back for no more than twice that amount, and that he or his heirs couldn't sell it to anyone else without first offering it to me at that price. He also wasn't allowed to disclose the price he paid for it. He called his former secretary, and she came over and notarized the documents. We shook hands, then I left. I was partway home when everything hit me like a ton of bricks and I began crying. I was crying so hard I had to pull over. I couldn't see the road. I didn't realize that this was a loading zone until this female officer tapped on my window, asking me for my driver's license and registration. She could see that the front of my shirt was wet from my tears. When she asked why I had stopped and what was wrong, I blurted out the whole story. My tears kept flowing, and she asked me to step to the sidewalk. She asked if I had been drinking, and I smiled and said, "I wish, but no, beautiful, I haven't had any, unless you would care to go have one with me." I chuckled a bit, which seemed to stop the tears. Officer Foster, well, that's what her name tag read, said, "I don't think you really need anything to drink right now, though you could probably use some company. Besides, I don't think my husband would like it if I went with you. He's a detective on the force and kickboxes for fun." I could see myself getting trounced by a jealous husband and stepped back against my car. She smiled and said, "I do, however, have a younger sister that you might enjoy taking out for a few drinks tonight. She kicked out her cheating husband 2 years ago, and I've been after her to get out of the house and have some fun. Let me give her a call." I started to tell her not to make that call, but before I could say anything, she was talking to her sister, Cassie, telling her that she had met a nice gentleman that could use some cheering up and that I wanted to take her out for a nice dinner, dancing, and drinks. She looked at me and nodded as if to ask me if that was all right, and I shrugged my shoulders and nodded yes. I heard her say, "Yes, you will go. So get fancied up, and I'm going to have him pick you up at 6:30. His name is Michael Grant, and his wife is cheating on him, and he's going to divorce her. He's not expecting anything from you other than some good company and talk. Got it, sis?" I didn't know what to say. I had just been set up by this cute officer and didn't know whether I should be happy about it or not. She gave me Cassie's address and cell phone number and said, "Michael, treat her right. Remember, I have all your information here on my pad. I think the two of you need each other right now, so go have a little fun." Sure. I drove home in a fog. I still hadn't heard from Kelly, but Alicia was there. She could see the tear stains on my shirt and gave me a long hug and said, "Daddy, it's going to be all right. We will be fine without her, I promise." I looked at my beautiful daughter and said, "What would you say if I told you that I was stopped by a female officer today because I had pulled over due to me crying so hard that I couldn't see where I was going?" I broke down and told her the whole story. Then she pulled me out of the car, and we talked on the curb. She wanted to know if I had been drinking, and I jokingly asked her if she would like to have a drink with me. She informed me that her husband was also on the force and was also a kickboxer. Then she proceeded to call her younger sister and set me up with a date with her for tonight. "Honey, I haven't been on a date with another woman, ever. Am I being a cad?" Alicia smiled and gave me another big hug and said, "Daddy, you'd better go get cleaned up, and I want you to look your best. I'm not saying I want you to jump her bones. I just want you to go have some fun. Relax and talk with this. What's her name?" I said, "Cassie." "Okay, Cassie then. You take her out and enjoy yourself. Kelly has torn your heart out. Our hearts really. Don't dwell on her screwing you over. Only think of your date. Promise me that, please." I looked at my daughter and said, "Alicia, my sweetness, when did you grow up and become so wise beyond your years? Without you, I think I might have crawled into a hole and died." "Thank you." Alicia asked, "Have you told James yet?" I shook my head no. "Well, tonight I'm giving him a call, and he's going to get an earful. I'm not going to pull any punches. Now get upstairs. get cleaned up and ready for your date. I went up to my bedroom and showered, shaved, and put on a nice pair of slacks, a dress shirt, some matching penny loafers, and a sports coat to go with everything, then headed downstairs to have myself a glass of wine. I still hadn't heard from Kelly, though my phone showed she had texted David and it said, "Barney's 7 o'clock. He had texted back, "MP first." I just shook my head, and shortly afterward my wife walked in and tried to give me a kiss on the cheek, but I pulled away. It didn't faze her as she headed up to our bedroom, showered, and got herself ready to go out. She came out looking so damn good. I really wanted to pull her back to the bedroom and rip her clothes off of her and screw her silly, but I knew she wasn't dressed that way for me. She had on a sheer white peasant blouse, tight black yoga pants, and black pumps. I looked at her and asked, "Honey, why are you dressed like that? Are you going to meet David?" She smiled and said, "Michael, I would never do that. I told you he was just a fantasy. I'm meeting a few of the other nurses for a ladies' night out to get rid of some stress. We'll probably be out late, so don't wait up, Kay. Darling?" She wanted to give me a kiss on the cheek, but it was an air kiss. She hadn't even noticed that I was dressed up. Oh well, the lying witch. I checked the GPS movement on her car, and it showed it going to the ritzy part of the city where the new townhouses were. I guess that was where David lived. My app showed his address, and I put a pin on it and closed the app. Looking at my watch, I figured I had better get going to meet Cassie. My wife, well, soon-to-be ex-wife, had left the house supposedly to meet with her girlfriends, but I already knew she was meeting up with her boyfriend. What she didn't realize was that a kind-hearted officer had stopped to see why I was parked in a loading zone crying, and after hearing my story, set me up with her divorced sister. I really hadn't dated anybody other than Kelly, nearly 30 years ago. Anxious to see what was going to happen, I got in my car and headed out. I stopped and picked up a lovely bouquet of flowers, then headed to her house. Apparently, she had done well for herself because it was in a very nice home in an upscale neighborhood. I rang the bell and damn near swallowed my tongue. Standing there in front of me was the living version of Jessica Rabbit. I mean, flaming red hair, huge jugs, slinky waist, though she didn't have a big bum, and her legs, OMG. She was wearing a tight black silk top. Her black and white pleated skirt was about mid-thigh in length, and she was wearing 4-inch CFM black patent leather heels with nylons. Cassie looked me up and down, then smiled and said, "Nice to meet you, Michael. I see Laura didn't exaggerate when she told me about you. Would you care for a drink before we leave? I really should put those lovely flowers in a vase with some water. Come in," as she took them from my hand. As I walked into her home, I could see it was very well appointed, and I told her so. She thanked me, and we walked into the kitchen, and she poured each of us a glass of wine. She already had the wine open and 2 glasses out. I leaned against her counter watching her as she bent over looking under the sink for a vase. The one she wanted was way in the back, giving me a lovely view of her stocking tops. My head and tried to get those thoughts out of my mind, remembering Officer Foster's words. Cassie put the flowers into the vase with water, and we chatted a bit while we finished the first glass of wine, then the second before I said we needed to get going. I took her to Delaney's Steakhouse. They have the very best aged steaks on the West Coast as far as I'm concerned. Cassie seemed concerned about the prices, and I assured her not to worry. I could afford it. I said, "I think you deserve something special. Would you like to try the beef Wellington or the bacon-wrapped filet mignon?" She smiled like a kid locked in a candy store and asked, "Are you sure it's okay?" I told her to pick one, and she said, "I've never had a beef Wellington. I really would like to try it if that's okay with you." I motioned to the waitress, and we placed our orders. Dinner and conversation were delightful. Then we moved to the bar with its dance floor, and dancing with her was like moving a cloud. Plus, she smelled so good. I could have devoured her for dessert. She pressed me, and I told her the story of Kelly and David. Cassie shook her head and hugged me. I found myself forgetting about Kelly until I got a message on my phone from her phone that was from one of her friends, asking her where she was at. They were at the playpen and had expected her to be there. Her reply was, "I got tied up with something more important. See you at work. Kisses." I looked at my lovely date and asked, "How would you like to have a little fun?" She asked what was on my mind. I said, "Well, my wife and her lover are over at Barney's tonight. How about you and I go over there for a few drinks and dances and see if she notices?" Her girlfriends just texted her wanting to know why she hadn't met them at the playpen for drinks like she said she would. Cassie said, "Cool, I like your style. Let's go rub it in her face. I can be just as nasty as you'd like if that's what you want. I smiled and nodded at her. I paid the tab, and we headed to my car. We were about halfway to Barney's when she asked, "Michael, how are you getting your wife's texts?" I smiled and said, "Somehow, now they show up on my phone. It must be magic. Or a very sneaky spy program I installed on her phone after she told me about her plans to have sex with David." Cassie shook her head and squeezed my hand. She leaned over and kissed my cheek, saying, "Remind me never to get on your bad side, okay?" We got to Barney's, and it was packed as usual on a Friday night. I had my arm around Cassie's waist when she said, "Is that them?" as she pointed to the far corner. I swallowed hard as I saw my soon-to-be ex-wife in the dress that she had described, the one that David had bought for her in Dallas. I will have to admit, she did look damn hot in the little black dress with her tall red CFM heels on and the pearls and earrings accentuating her jugs. David had his hand inside of her dress, fondling her bum. Then Cassie said, "Did you let her leave home dressed like that?" I shook my head and said, "No, she was wearing a white peasant blouse, black yoga pants, and pumps when she left. I've never seen her in that dress before." She told me he bought it for her when they were in Dallas, the pearls and earrings too. I did track her car to where I believe David lives though tonight. Cassie shook her head and said in my ear, "I'd bet she screwed him there too." I cringed but figured she was right. We waited as they danced another dance before sitting down at a booth in the back. We stood at the bar enjoying a drink and talking about our lives for a bit until a booth not too far from them opened up and Cassie pulled me over to it. Kelly and David didn't notice. They were too involved with each other. As a good old rock and roll song started, Cassie said, "Can you swing dance?" I smiled and stood up, pulling her up out of the booth, and we hit the dance floor like I did when I was in high school. Damn, it felt good dancing with her. Kelly never cared for doing the swing. Cassie was an excellent dancer, and we were getting pretty wild. I was spinning her around and sliding her through my legs and across my back. Pretty soon the crowd had separated, giving us room to really show off. Just as the song ended, I pulled her down under my legs, then yanked her hard and flung her into the air where she flew up, twirled, then spread her arms and came down with her legs around my waist and her jugs in my face, sliding slowly down my body, very seductively, and ended it with a smoldering kiss. The crowd went wild with yells, screams, and applause. We turned to go back to our table when I heard Kelly yell, "Michael Grant, what the hell do you think you're doing?" I turned and she was storming towards us, with David on her heels. Cassie and I moved to our table and sat down. Then Kelly continued, "What's the big idea, Michael? You're my husband, and who the hell is this? What makes you think you can flaunt her out like this in front of me and all these people? I thought you loved me?" Before I could say anything, Cassie stood up and got her face. "Listen, Missy, you think it's okay if you screw David here, but you go ballistic if your sweet husband goes on a date with another woman. Isn't that being hypocritical, you witch?" Kelly stammered a bit, then said, "But he's my husband and I love him." Cassie laughed and said, "Yeah, right. You love him so much you're screwing David here. Tell me, how do you think that's love, honey? Please, explain it to me." Kelly said, "It's just something I need to do and get out of my system. Then I'm coming back to Michael to still be his loving wife. What can't you understand?" Cassie shook her head and got closer to Kelly's face and said, "You're a crazy witch. If you think that you can go screw David then go back to Michael, you're off your rocker. 99% of men, Michael included, won't put up with a wife screwing around, and especially when she throws it in his face as you have. If I were in his place, I'd have already kicked your cheating bum out the door. I hope you realize you have thrown away the best thing you ever had." Kelly screamed at her, "No, I'm coming back to him, honest." I looked at her and said, "Kelly, I'm not putting up with your crazy ideas. I'm already talking to a lawyer. You're allowing him into your room, getting naked in front of him, playing with his tool, allowing him to give you B-job, then begging him to screw you is more than I can handle. You don't seem to want to be my wife, so I'm going to give you your freedom. You can go screw whomever you wish. By the way, I have to leave on Sunday to go to Seattle for a week on business. If you persist with having an affair with David, we're through. Got it?" Kelly was crying and said, "Honest, Michael, we haven't had sex." Then she turned to David and said, "Have we, dear?" David didn't answer. He just looked at the floor. I said, "Well, Kelly, I guess I have my answer. She grabbed David's lapels and shook him and said over and over, Tell Michael we haven't had sex yet. I stood and as Cassie was about to leave, I said, Kelly, I pray I don't find positive proof that you two have been intimate or divorce proceedings will begin. Do I make myself perfectly clear? It's your call, David or me. Cassie pulled me towards the exit, though I had to stop and settle our tab. Once in the car, I started it and Cassie reached out and took my hand in hers. She leaned over and kissed my cheek, then we drove in silence to her place. I got out, opened her door, then walked her to her front door. Cassie turned and thanked me for a wonderful evening, and I said, even having to put up with all the drama? She unlocked her door, then said, Michael, I've never done this before, but would you like to come in and spend the night with me? I moaned, then kissed her deeply and said, more than you will ever know, my sweet lady, more than you will ever know, but I'm still married. Even though she isn't sticking to our wedding vows, I feel obligated to abide by them until a judge voids them. I hope you can understand. Cassie was looking so deeply into my eyes. I felt like she was looking into my soul. She smiled and said, you are a good man, Michael Grant. Please don't forget me and keep me in your thoughts if you ever change your mind. She gave me a deep kiss, our tongues darting together as her hand cupped my manhood, and she moaned, nice. I left and went home to wait to see if Kelly would return. About 3 o'clock in the morning, I got a call from her friend Phyllis saying that Kelly was there and told her she couldn't go home and wanted me to know she was okay. I figured she had gone ahead and screwed David and didn't want to confront me. My trip to Seattle was hectic. Evergreen Industries wasn't quite the goodbye it was portrayed to be, at least at the Tacoma plant wasn't. We were going over their records, and the timesheets showed a very poor attendance record. I met with HR and told them that when we took over, we were going to institute mandatory drug and alcohol testing before allowing an employee back without a doctor's note if they missed a day from work. She smiled and said, that's about time someone grew a set of balls around here, sir. Most of our absentees are either Thursday, the day after payday, or Monday after a weekend of partying. If they're sick or their kids are, they better go to the doctors and get checked out. Our insurance covers that. I got her name. I already liked her. Just before noon, I got a call from my daughter. She said, Dad, I was with my friend and she was taking me home to get a change of clothes because I spilled ice cream all over my dress and Kelly was standing in the driveway talking on a new cell phone. I think she may be onto us. David must have gotten her a burner phone. I hunkered down so she didn't see me, and as soon as she left, I went back to the house and changed clothes, then called the school and told them I had gotten sick. The GPS shows her car is parked at the Sheraton downtown. When I was changing clothes, there was a notepad in the kitchen and I could make out some scribbles where she had written on the previous page. I rubbed a pencil across it but couldn't tell if it was room 1117 or 1119, so I'm going to grab my little recorder and your Nikon and head up there. Wish me luck. Alicia, wait, I said, but it was too late. She had hung up. This next part is what Alicia told me. Alicia's side of story. I got to the Sheraton and walked in like I owned the place so no one questioned me. They had almost an hour's head start on me, so I figured they'd be busy little beavers and took the elevator to the 11th floor. 1117 and 1119 were at the end of the corridor, and listening to the door, it was easy to hear Kelly orgasming in the last one, 1119. I turned on the recorder and slid it under the door as far as it would go, hooked to my selfie stick. I had plugged in an earpiece and was listening to her tell him how good he was and how much she loved getting a bigger one than my father. This was going on for almost half an hour when I felt a tap on my shoulder, and behind me stood the manager, and he asked, "What are?" I put my fingers to my lips to get him to be quiet and moved us away from the door. I whispered into his ear and said, "My mother and her lover are in there, and she is cheating on my father. I'm trying to get evidence so that he can divorce her. Please don't give me away, sir. I love my father so much and she is so screwed up in the head." She told him she wants to have this affair, and when it's over, she wants to come back to him. Only it has crushed him. Heck, it has crushed me too. Please don't kick me out. He looked at me then said, "Miss, I hate cheaters. My ex cheated on me for years before I found out. Does your camera video record?" I nodded. He smiled and asked, "Get it ready?" I got the camera set to record and moved the voice recorder out of the way, putting it in my purse. He got his master key ready and quickly stuck it into the lock. He gave me the thumbs up and I returned one to him. We stepped in and my former mother was on her hands and knees, howling like an animal, and David was behind her taking long strokes into her kitty. They didn't even notice us as we slowly walked up to them. She was telling him to screw her harder, deeper. He said, "You got it, babe." And here it comes now as he exploded into my former mother. That's when David turned and saw us standing there, me recording everything with my father's camera. I heard him yell, "Oh, Kelly, it's Alicia and she's recording us." Kelly turned her head in sort of a dreamy state, then was snapped back to reality when she saw me and the manager standing there. He said, "Dr. Patterson and Mrs. Grant, please get dressed and remove yourselves from my establishment. I do not condone cheaters here, and if you stay more than 10 minutes, I will be calling the police and charging you with trespassing. Do I make myself perfectly clear?" David was frantically trying to find his clothing as Kelly pulled the sheet around her and called for me to come to her. I said, "Sorry, you 304 and my former mother. You have really gone and screwed your life away this time. A copy of this is already being sent to the cloud, Daddy and his parents, James, Grandma Thompson, your sister, your employers, everyone on your computer's contact list, and Daddy's lawyer. Also, don't bother coming home as you no longer live there. By the time you get there, all the locks will be changed, as will be the security code on the alarm and the garage door openers. You might as well move in with your lover. You can enjoy him anytime you wish from now on. I will put all your things in garbage bags, and they will be on the curb by tonight, though I think I may burn the wedding dress you were keeping for me." I couldn't wear such a tarnished thing now. Kelly screamed, "No, no, no, Alicia, I love your father." I turned to the manager and said, "Does that look like love to you? It sure doesn't to me." He looked at his watch and said, 5 minutes left, as I walked out. I made the calls to the locksmith and the security company, then the garage door company, and told them it was an emergency. They promised it would be done within the hour. I said I would meet them there and headed home. At least I had done my part for my father. He deserves a lot better than what Kelly did to him. Giving you back to father now. Now, Michael. I received the video Alicia had shot and was physically sick. Not so much from their screwing, but from the put-downs the two of them had made of me, especially by my wife. Or should I say soon-to-be ex-wife. I called my lawyer and told him to go ahead and start divorce proceedings. He said he had already been forwarded copies of the video and audio that Alicia had sent. He said we'd probably have to sell the house, or I would have to buy her out, and said she would most likely get half of my business. I told him, let her try, but didn't elaborate. I completed the tour of Evergreen Industries, and the three of us got together and formulated a report to give to the board. We had decided to keep the Kent, Renton, and Everett facilities and sell off the Tacoma location and move the employees to the other locations or furlough them. It wouldn't be too difficult as a lot of the Tacoma crew had already quit when it was announced that drug and alcohol testing would be required after missed days without a doctor's slip. I had one hell of a time resisting getting shit-faced that evening. Saturday morning, when I got home, I immediately noticed the deep markings on our front door. I rang the bell because my key didn't work, and Alicia let me in. She hugged me and handed me my new keys and garage door opener and gave me the new security code. I motioned to the front door and asked, "Your mother?" Alicia grinned, then said, "You mean that 304 that you were married to?" "Yes, she was beating on it with a baseball bat, so I called the police. Then she swung it at the officers, and they hauled her bum to jail." I don't know when I had such a good laugh. I shook my head at her and I said, "You're mean. Just plain mean, but I love you for it. You know it? Where would you like to go to dinner? I have a friend I would like you to meet." Alicia giggled and said, "You mean Cassie, the one that told Mother? I mean Kelly off?" I took her in my arms and said, "Yes, that Cassie, and honey, I know you're upset, but she still is your mother, and it's okay if you call her that to me. I know you're calling her Kelly to her face just to let her know how pissed off you are with her. Hell, so am I, but I figured all the yelling, screaming, and name-calling isn't going to do any good. She's made her bed. Now she gets to lay in it. Right?" Alicia buried her head in my chest and hugged the daylights out of me for the longest time. When she finally let go, I asked her, "Now, baby cakes, where would you like to go to dinner?" Alicia got this sly look and said, "Delaney's, if that's okay with you. Would you mind if I took one of her dresses to wear tonight?" I kept a few that I liked. She had so many, I didn't think she'd miss a few. I really don't have anything classy enough to wear there except my old prom dresses. I nodded and she screamed, "Yes," as she turned and ran up the stairs to my bedroom. I went into the den and poured myself a drink. Then I called Cassie. "Hello there, beautiful. I just got back and I couldn't stop thinking about you. I was wondering if you would care to go out to dinner with Alicia and myself tonight?" I asked. Cassie asked, "Care to tell me what happened with Kelly?" I told her not really, but then I told her that Alicia could tell her better that night at dinner. "Where are we going so I know how to dress?" "It'll take me about 10 minutes to get ready. It's nothing fancy. Alicia wants to go to Delaney's if that's all right with you," I told her. "Delaney's? Listen, Michael, you'd better give me half an hour, okay?" she said, a little panicked. "No problem. Alicia will probably take longer than that to get ready," I told her. She hung up and I headed upstairs to clean up and make myself presentable. I put on a suit and tie since I figured the girls were going to dress to the nines. I should too. When I finished dressing, I headed downstairs to finish my drink. I had my suit coat draped over the chair and was sitting in the kitchen waiting for Alicia. I heard the clicking of heels on the tile floor, and when she walked in, I would have sworn it was Kelly and had trouble swallowing. Her hair was done up like Kelly used to do when we went out for a night on the town, pulled up in a comb and water falling down her back, only Alicia was blonde. She was wearing her mother's gray silk wrap dress, which clung to her like plastic wrap. The dress clung so tightly to her. She looked at me and asked, "What's the matter, Daddy? Don't you like this dress?" I had to take a few deep breaths. Tonight was going to be harder than I thought. We drove over to Cassie's, and we both got out and rang her bell. When she opened her door, she was wearing a red sequin dress that really did remind me of Jessica Rabbit. I think she stopped my heart. Cassie looked past me and asked, "Michael, do you have 2 dates tonight?" "Sorry, Cassie, this is my daughter Alicia." "Alicia, this is Cassie," I said. Both of the ladies were looking each other up and down, then they broke into big smiles and gave each other a big hug. Cassie pulled Alicia in and wanted to know everything about how she caught her mother and David. They sat on the couch and Alicia took out her cell phone and played the video for Cassie, which seemed to be turning her on. She went into detail about everything that she saw and heard. Finally, I said that we had better be going and ushered the girls out of the door. As we got to the car, Alicia opened the back door and held out her hand, asking for my keys. I said, "What do you think you're doing?" My sweet daughter said, "Father, you are on a date with a very beautiful woman and I'm going to chauffeur you, so you two climb in back and I will drive. Now Cassie, please enter." She did, and Alicia closed the door, then went around and opened the other door for me. She shut it, then got in the driver's seat, and we went to Delaney's. They have valet parking and she pulled in there, and as the one on the restaurant side let Cassie out, you could see that young kid's eyes pop out. But when the other one went to let Alicia out, I thought he was going to stop breathing. Then I remembered that wrap dress she was wearing. Thought he was watching her as she sauntered across the front of the car, finally remembering to let me out. So I rushed and I took each lady in an arm, and the 3 of us walked into the restaurant. Luckily, I had called and made a reservation because there were half a dozen couples waiting for a table. Boy, was I getting the looks from both the men and women waiting. I gave the maitre d' my name, and he took us right in. Upon seeing the ladies, I think they must have drawn straws to see who served us. A very handsome young blonde man ended up as our server. He was probably in his late 20s. He came up and introduced himself as Dane and asked us what we would like to drink. Cassie and I ordered a bottle of Riesling, then he turned to Alicia and she said, "Dane, I'm driving these 2 tonight, so I'd better not drink. How about an Arnold Palmer?" He smiled at her. I sighed and guessed she was growing up. Something no father likes to see his little girl do. All during dinner, she was obviously flirting with him, and he was at our table at least 3 times as much as any other table he was taking care of. After dinner, we moved to the lounge where the dancing was. Alicia was being bombarded with requests for dances and offers to buy her drinks. Cassie was also being asked to dance, but she didn't want to upset me. I saw her concern and said, "Cassie, you are not my exclusive property. Not yet anyway. If a guy asks you to dance and you'd like to, go for it, girl. I just ask you to look at me first. If I think he's okay, I will give you a slight nod. If I don't, I will take a sip of my drink or ask you to dance myself. Are you okay with that?" She smiled and kissed me on the lips. We had a great time and I danced with both Cassie and my daughter. While I was dancing a fairly slow song with Alicia, I said, You sure seem to enjoy flirting with Dane, don't you? You also have gotten a lot of the men in this room quite smitten with you. You know that, don't you? She smirked and said, "It's fun, but I'm not married either. Besides, Daddy, I don't know if he's old enough for me." I looked shocked, then she laughed and lightly hit my chest and said, "Gotcha." Just then Dane walked up in a dress suit and tie and polished dress shoes and asked Alicia to dance. Her eyes lit up and I extended her hand over to him, and she took his and gave me a very big smile as he began to twirl her around the floor. I walked back to our table and waited for Cassie to finish dancing with the guy she was on the dance floor with. When she came back, she gave me a real smoldering kiss, telling me, "That was so cool the way you let Alicia go dancing with Dane. I was watching, you know. I had seen him watching you too since you guys hit the dance floor. Tell me, how do you feel about your daughter dating someone like him?" A slow song started playing and I pulled her out on the dance floor, and as we danced cheek to cheek, I told her, even though I'm her father, I have to allow her to grow up to be a woman, to make her own decisions and make her own mistakes. Oh, I will be here to give her advice, but will do it only if she asks. I'm not going to preach or beat my values into her. I pray that she turns out to be a fine young adult, wife, and mother, but only time will tell. Cassie held me out at arm's length and said, "Mr. Michael Grant, you sir have the wisdom of Solomon. I do believe I am falling in love with you, even though we've only known each other for a short while." She then kissed me deeply, thrusting her tongue far into my mouth. We weren't even keeping tempo with the music. We were just floating around the edge of the dance floor dancing while looking into others' eyes. At midnight, Alicia let out a big yawn, as did Cassie, so I said, "I guess it's time for us to head home, isn't it, ladies?" They both agreed, so we got up. I paid the tab, then left to take Cassie home. Cassie and I were in the back seat, making out like a couple of teenagers when I felt my car pulling up a driveway. I looked up and realized it was my driveway, especially as the garage door opened and Alicia pulled into the garage. Alicia patted my arm and said, "That's okay, Dad. We girls are going to have a sleepover. Is that okay with you?" "Dad?" I thought. I guess so, Alicia. I just wasn't planning on having my girlfriend stay over at my house this early in our relationship." Cassie shrieked, "Girlfriend," as she grabbed both sides of my head and pulled me onto the mother of all kisses, at least the best one that I'd had in years, leaving me breathless. "Come on, you two. Get out of that back seat. You're giving me a bad example," she said with a laugh. We got out and went into the kitchen, and I asked Cassie if she would like a glass of wine. I don't know why, because she and I were already feeling pretty happy, but then Alicia piped up and said, "Sure, Daddy. Both of us would enjoy a glass. I'm at home now and can't get in any trouble." I opened a bottle of a sweet Riesling, and both ladies loved it. Alicia ran upstairs, came back, and handed Cassie one of my white t-shirts. Then the two of them disappeared into Alicia's room. Cassie yelled, "Michael, go get your PJs on. We're going to make popcorn and watch a movie, and you're joining us," just before she shut the bedroom door. I went to my room and undressed and slipped on a pair of silk pajamas that Kelly had bought for me for our 15th anniversary, and I think I got to wear them maybe 10 minutes before she was ripping them off of me so she could get into with me. They were washed, dried, put back in their box, and had been on the top of the closet ever since. They were black silk with red piping. I looked at myself in the mirror and wondered if a pipe would make me look more dashing. Then I laughed at myself. That was the booze talking. As I opened my bedroom door, the smell of popcorn came wafting up the stairway. Shit, I couldn't remember how long it had been since there had been popcorn in this house. Kelly had read that microwave popcorn caused cancer, so therefore in her mind, all popcorn was bad for us. I walked into the kitchen, following that heavenly smell, and stood mesmerized. Cassie was wearing just my old white t-shirt and a pair of pink lace boy panties. As she shook the popcorn in the pan, Alicia walked in. She took a bowl of butter out of the microwave and brought it over to the table where there was already a large bowl, halfway full of popped corn. Cassie took the pan of the corn she had just popped and added it to the bowl as my daughter poured the butter over it, and Cassie stirred it all up. Cassie picked up the bowl, and as she headed into the den, she said, "Michael, want to grab that bottle of wine and maybe another one in a bowl of ice?" I nodded. Then we heard a yell from the den. The movie has started. So Alicia quickly headed into her bedroom and came back with a cover-up hiding her outfit. Cassie was sitting in the middle of our big couch with a blanket covering her legs. Alicia crawled under one side, and I got in next to Cassie on the other. Cassie had streamed Pride and Prejudice through her Amazon account to our big screen TV. She was holding the bowl of popcorn close to Alicia, so I had to reach across her to grab a handful, and each time I did, I couldn't help but rub against her without a bit of acknowledgement of my actions. Cassie kept drinking wine and was refilling Alicia's glass every time it was down a little. When Alicia got up to use the bathroom, I whispered to Cassie, "Are you trying to get my daughter drunk?" She pulled me into a kiss and grinning said, "No, Michael. I just want her to sleep soundly so we don't bother her when I drag you to bed and have my way with you." As we watched the movie, Alicia became enthralled watching it. Cassie slipped her hand inside my pajama bottoms and started teasing me what exquisite torture it was. I wasn't following the movie worth beans, truth be told. Her forecast was spot on as halfway through the movie, Alicia was snoring. Cassie moved the blanket off of us and picked her up and carried her into her bedroom and put her to bed as I folded the blanket, turned off the TV and lights, then took the empty wine bottles, glasses, and popcorn bowls into the kitchen. She came up behind me and grabbing my hips, spun me around and pulled my bottoms down to my feet. She gave me a B job. Kelly hadn't given me head in years. Shit, I couldn't even remember how long ago it was, but Cassie was doing everything perfectly. When she removed her lips from mine, she so sexily said, "Michael, take me to bed and make love to me, please." I took her hand and we scurried up the stairs to the master bedroom, and in a flash, she tore off the t-shirt and panties. Cassie was incredibly excited to be with me. I was over the moon in ecstasy. If I hadn't already over, I would have blasted off, just entering her. I feel so damn good. I just wish I didn't feel so guilty. Cassie looked at me and asked, "What do you have to feel guilty about?" I said, "Well, technically, I am still married to Kelly." Cassie jumped up and straddled my stomach and pinned my shoulders to the mattress, then said firmly, "Michael Grant, you have nothing to feel guilty about. Your soon-to-be ex-wife made the decision to screw someone else. She stopped loving you some time ago. In her mind, she was no longer married to you. You were just a paycheck to her. Didn't you say that she hadn't made love to you in months? Does that sound like a loving wife? Personally, I think she was out screwing someone else but wanted to try some meat and see if you would okay it and hoped you would become a cuck. So don't you dare feel guilty." I had just had the most intense sexual experience of my life with a woman that could easily have been a playboy or hustler centerfold, but in a way, it was a double-edged sword. Having her for a girlfriend was going to be a wild new experience for me, but I had lost the woman that I had loved for most of my life and thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with. Cassie's words hit home, and the reality of it stung. I started to agree with her, but our conversation was interrupted by Alicia, who was standing in the doorway watching us. Walking into the room, she said, "Cassie's right, Dad. I don't know if you know or not, but as soon as I turned 16, Mom took me to the doctors and had an IUD put in. Then she took me to lunch, and we had a long talk. She told me that one of her big regrets in life was that she hadn't messed around more with other guys while she was in college, or even while you were stationed far away from her. She said that if I had the opportunity to have sex with a guy, that I should experience it before I got tied down. She also told me that I should insist on the guy using a condom because of the possibility of disease. 3 months later, I became sexually active, and when I told her about it, she made me promise to tell her about every time I was with a boy or man, and a few times, while I was telling her, she'd enjoy herself while I did. She was using my sexual activities to fulfill her fantasies. Only a little over 6 months ago, she stopped asking. I think she was having an affair with someone starting back then. I pulled up the sheet to cover us, and Alicia laughed, saying, "I've been watching you two for the past half an hour, and now you cover up? Get real, Dad." "Hey, Cassie, thanks for taking care of him. You two sure seem to enjoy each other." I looked at my daughter and said, "So a few high school boys have made you an expert, huh?" Alicia walked over and sat on the edge of the bed and patted my leg and said, "Yes, Dad, a few high school boys, dozens of college boys, 2 of my teachers, and some of our neighbors. Mom is the one that pushed me into trying the older men. With all the playing I did, I think I can tell when a couple is into each other." I was at a loss for words, but not Cassie. "Damn girl, I thought that the 5 men I've been with was a lot, but you've done enough to write a book. Hell, maybe you should." she said to my daughter, but I was still in shock. My wife had turned my daughter into a 304, and I had no idea. I finally got my voice and said, Alicia, you can't go on like this. You will find yourself unhappy in marriage if you do. I don't know of too many men that will allow their wives to have sex with other men and stay married. Have you thought about that? Of course, Daddy, she said. Next fall, I'm going to college back in Jackson, Tennessee. Aunt Beth lives about a 5-minute walk from the college. I know what's in my college fund, and since I won't have to worry about room and board, and I'm sure you will let me take my car and pay my insurance, I will have more than enough to pay for my college education, and I plan on being a goody two-shoes once I get there. No one there will know my past. I figure I have all my wild side out of me and will not marry until I've been out of school for a few years. Cassie looked at me and said, Michael, you have to admit, she had a good head on her shoulders and has this well thought out. I muttered, all except screwing her teachers, our neighbors, and all those college kids, but it's her life now. Then I said, come here, Alicia, and give your old fuddy-duddy father a hug. She did, and Cassie joined in. Then I asked, Alicia, what did your mother say about messing around with guys in college? My daughter thought for a moment, then said, well, I guess I opened my mouth, so here goes. Mom was having sex with a few guys when she was in college, but hoped you never found out. Even after she became pregnant. I guess she was screwing that guy that you caught her with, and that scared the shit out of him so much he wouldn't touch her again. She said he had a small tool. She was so pissed at you for scaring him off. That's the reason she wouldn't talk to you for a while. It wasn't grandma like she said it was. I lay there wondering how I could have been so wrong about the woman I loved so much. Was our whole marriage nothing but a sham? Just a joke to her? So I asked her, Alicia, do you know of any affairs she had after that? My daughter shook her head and said, no, Daddy. I had my suspicions from time to time, but there was never anything I could prove. There was a couple of times that I came home from school and a strange man was in the house, and she passed him off as a repairman or investigator or something. I do remember it being funny because once she introduced me to the same guy, but she used a different name. When I questioned her about it later, she said that I must have been mistaken. So I believe she was cheating on you all along. It's just nothing that I can prove. In divorce court, Kelly was fighting the divorce. Her argument was that she still loved me, and her one indiscretion shouldn't really affect our marriage. It was just something she had to get out of her system, and she had planned on coming back and going on with her normal life. Then her lawyer called Kelly's therapist, and she testified that I should be more understanding of Kelly's needs, that I should forgive her and take her back. After she has been a wonderful wife to me for over 20 years, and now I wanted to throw it all away. She pointed her finger at me and said, shame on you, Michael Grant. The judge told her to control herself or face contempt of court charges. Her lawyer called her former employer, Dr. Penrose, who testified that Kelly was a great nurse and was one of his best surgical assistants he ever had. Then our lawyer asked him if he had ever been propositioned by Kelly, and he told him that he hadn't. He was then released. Then our lawyer called up Lori Penrose, his wife. Kelly's lawyer objected, and the judge overruled his objection. Our lawyer asked her, Mrs. Penrose, did you ever have an occasion to have suspicions that Kelly Grant wanted to seduce your husband, Dr. Penrose? Mrs. Penrose turned and glared at Kelly and said to him, yes. On several occasions when I was supposed to be out of the office, she would come to work wearing very short skirts or blouses without wearing a bra. She would try to get my husband to take her out to lunch and make sexual innuendos while they worked. My husband is too nice a guy to say anything bad about Kelly, but others working in our office told me about what was going on. When I confronted my husband, he admitted it, but did say he had never done anything with her and claimed it was just some harmless flirting. What she was doing was far beyond harmless if you ask me. One of the other nurses said that she often went out with the pharmaceutical representatives for long lunches, if you get my drift. Then Kelly's lawyer asked to cross her, and he smugly asked, Mrs. Penrose, did you actually see Mrs. Grant improperly dressed and come on to your husband, or go out to lunch with one of the pharmaceutical representatives? She smiled at him and said, sir, I never caught her coming on to my husband, but yes, I did on a few occasions come into the office when I had planned on being off and found her dressed improperly, and a couple of times when she came back from a long lunch with one of the reps, she looked like she had been in bed with them. Her hair and makeup were a mess, and she would rush to the bathroom and fix herself up. I never said anything to her because I didn't feel it was any of my business if she was a cheating 304 or not. The judge asked her to please watch her language, and she nodded and asked Kelly's lawyer, "Any further questions, counselor?" He shook his head no, so the judge released her. Then it was our turn. My lawyer called Alicia. First, Alicia testified about finding strange men at times when she got home from school, and the time she introduced the same man only used a different name. Then to the fact that her mother had taken her down to her doctor's and had her get an IUD within a few days of her turning 16, then took her to lunch and told her how she regretted not having sex with more guys both before and after she married her father. Alicia said that left her in shock. She also told her that older guys tend to make better lovers. Not old but say, 30 to 45 or so. Then she told her that she should always use condoms too, just in case and to prevent disease. She told the court that it took her 3 months to build up the courage to allow a boy to go all the way with her, and when she told her mother that she had gone all the way, her mother wanted to know every detail and made Alicia promise to tell her about every time she was with someone, and often her mother would enjoy herself while Alicia was relating her story to her mother. She said that it was getting more and more frequent, but about 6 months before she caught her in bed with David, she stopped asking for information when she got home from a hot date. Alicia said, "I know I can't prove it, but her changes in attitude. It made me think that she was having an affair. It was just something in the way she behaved and smiled to herself all the time, but not when my father was around." Then the judge asked her if she would tell him the names of the teachers or our neighbors she played with. She said, "Your Honor, I respectfully decline, as I was the one that instigated our tryst. I don't feel prosecuting any of these men or breaking up their marriages would be the right thing to do." Then she asked if she could show the video of her going into the hotel room, and the judge allowed it, on condition all the visitors left the courtroom, over the screams from Kelly and objections from her lawyer. My lawyer controlled the remote, and he stopped it and replayed the parts where either Kelly or David were cutting me down. Kelly kept telling David how much better his huge tool felt and couldn't see herself going back to Michael's little tool again. There were several others jibes being said as Alicia and the hotel manager walked in on them. They were so busy going at it, they never noticed the two of them videoing them. Then my lawyer let the video play out. He released Alicia, and to my and everyone else's surprise, he called a Mrs. Jeffries. I saw Kelly's mouth drop open, and her lawyer stood and objected because he said that he hadn't been made aware of this witness being called. My lawyer explained that Mrs. Jeffrey had just come to him this morning with some information that she felt was important to his client's case. The judge allowed her to testify. My lawyer asked her what her full name was, and when she said, "Louise Marie Jeffrey," or "Mrs. Dr. Martin Jeffrey," whichever you prefer. I looked over at Kelly, and her mouth was wide open and she looked scared shitless. She quickly whispered something to her lawyer, and again he objected. Again the judge overruled him and told my lawyer to go ahead with Mrs. Jeffrey. He said, "Now Mrs. Jeffrey, you have been sworn in to tell the truth, is that correct?" She nodded, and he said, "Please speak up so the court can hear you. And please tell the court in your own words why you contacted me this morning." She said, "Yes, sir. I will tell the truth, and the reason I contacted you because I happened to hear that Kelly was contesting the divorce on the grounds that she loved her husband and that her affair was a one-time dalliance." My lawyer said, "Mrs. Jeffrey, do you have something to say or any evidence to say otherwise, that this wasn't a one-time fling?" She gave Kelly a dirty look and said, "Yes, Mr. Brawley. I know for a fact that it wasn't the first time she had cheated. She was having an affair with my husband for nearly 6 months before she was caught in flagrante delicto with her lover, Dr. Patterson. I turned over to you the videos my private investigator took of the two of them on multiple occasions, if you doubt my word." My attorney turned and asked the judge if he could show the evidence, and before the judge could answer, Kelly's lawyer objected. The judge just shook his head and said, "Sit down, counselor. I want to see this, and if I decide it doesn't pertain to this case, I will approve your objection." Then he turned to my lawyer and said, "Shall we proceed, Mr. Brawley?" My lawyer hit the remote, and on the screen flashed pictures of Kelly with this older gentleman sneaking into storage rooms at the hospital, then coming out 45 minutes to an hour later, their clothes disheveled. Then there were several of them in different hotels with them doing the horizontal mambo, only it wasn't always just horizontal. Kelly was quite the contortionist, only I never knew it. Then there was the part of where Dr. Jeffrey brought in 2 other men, and the 3 of them took on Kelly all at once. That set Kelly over the edge, and she started screaming, "Stop it! God damn it! Please just stop that damn thing." All right, so I'm human and I had needs. Then she turned to me and said, "But Michael, I still loved only you. Can't you understand that and forgive me?" The judge banged his gavel, and even though he said it under his breath to his clerk, you could still make out, "She calls that love?" Most of those in attendance broke into laughter. The video continued. Then it showed the PI following Kelly. She was going to a hotel with David Patterson 2 weeks before she was caught. It also showed her going over to his townhouse early in the morning, so they could have sex in the bedroom and kitchen before they left, and met at the little restaurant where I caught up with them. The video showed at least 6 times my wife had been with the good doctor, screwing him behind my back. I shook my head in disgust at her. Kelly turned red in the face and slumped back into her chair. My lawyer asked Mrs. Jeffrey, "Have you divorced Dr. Jeffrey?" She smiled and said, "Oh, heavens no. But he is paying handsomely." As one hand held up the large, beautiful diamond necklace from between her large aftermarket breasts, and she held out her other hand with a huge diamond ring. She elaborated, "He wasn't following our prenup, and now I've taken measures to ensure he doesn't stray again." My lawyer released her, and as she left the witness stand, Cassie pointed out to me her golden chain bracelet with a small gold key. I asked her what was the big deal with that key. Cassie smiled and whispered in my ear, "She has put his tool in a cage, and that's the key to it." I winced at the mental vision. Then the judge said since Kelly made a very good income as a surgical nurse, there would be no spousal aid, but she would have to pay child support because he had talked to Alicia and she wanted to stay with me, and I would continue to stay in the home with my daughter until she finished school, and that meant college. Also, after Alicia finished college, I was to sell the house and the proceeds divided 4 ways equally between Kelly, me, and the kids. Then the judge started to talk about my business, and my lawyer produced the documents that I had sold the company, and Kelly just about climbed over her lawyer to get at me. The judge looked the paperwork over and said, "Seems legal to me, so I guess there's nothing to split. You each get to keep your IRAS and retirement, but Mr. Grant has petitioned the court for you, Mrs. Grant, to give up your last name and go back to your maiden name, which I agree with. He also has asked for a 1-year restraining order barring you from coming within 1,000 feet of his workplace or your former home, or to follow him and bother him while he is out in public. Do I make myself perfectly clear? The officer you hit with the baseball bat is still on light duty, and if you violate these orders, you will find yourself in jail for a minimum of a year. Understood? I hereby grant the petitioner's desire for divorce. 60 days from today, your divorce will be final. Please come forward and sign these documents, and the clerk will take you to the records department so they can be filed." Kelly was totally pissed, was refusing to sign, so the judge said, "Kelly James, would you like to spend 90 days in jail for contempt of court?" So she signed. As soon as the judge left for his chambers and the clerk took our papers to the recorder's office, she began calling out to me saying, "Michael, I still love you. Please, can't you forgive me? Michael?" My lawyer ushered us out a side door and down a less public corridor and out the back entrance. Alicia and I got home, and I got out of my suit and into some comfortable sweats. When I came down, my daughter had poured me a tall glass of bourbon and Coke. Damn, I needed that. The doorbell rang, and she went to answer it and welcomed Cassie in. Alicia fixed her a glass of wine, and we took our drinks to my bedroom, while my daughter ordered pizza for our dinner. Cassie and I ate cold pizza late that night. Cassie and I dated hot and heavy for a couple of months before she asked me one night if I had given a thought to us getting married. This was preceded by a mind-blowing evening of sexual treats. I acted like I was in shock and was stretching and stuck my hand under my pillow and pulled out the little black velvet box and handed it to her. I had been planning on this for weeks now. Cassie's eyes went wide and she said, "Michael, if I open this and there's not a ring in there, you know I may go all Lorena Bobbitt on you, don't you?" I smiled and said, "My love, I'm willing to take that chance." When she opened the box, I'm sure her shrill squeal of joy could be heard blocks away. I know my ears sure rang for minutes afterwards. Cassie was smothering me with kisses, then I pulled away from her for a bit. I rolled over and reached between the mattresses. I pulled out our itinerary to Hedonism 2 in Negril, Jamaica, where I had reserved the honeymoon cottage for 2 weeks and also arranged for an evening beachside wedding with a beachside dinner for us and local DJ to help us celebrate our wedding. If other guests wanted to join, the more the merrier, I figured. Cassie gave me this pensive look but smiled. Besides, This gives me less than a month to get a dress, figure out what to pack, notify my boss, update my passport, and my kiss silenced her. Then rubbing her nose with mine, I said, "My darling, you know that sheer white nightgown I bought you last month? That's what I want you to wear when we get married, unless you find something you'd rather wear." I thought I'd wear some white nylon board shorts and a bow tie. We'll both be barefoot since I believe we'll be standing at the water's edge. Just think of how sexy those wedding pictures will be for us to look back at. I grabbed her hand and kissed it, then said, "Listen, my love, I'm not trying to do anything. I'm just saying let's go get married down there." "Breakfast is ready, Michael," said Cassie. She took off her apron and sat across from me while we ate, and once we were finished, I said, "My love, once we're married, I would like it if you did not go back to work. We just sort of retired. I have been offered a very nice sum for the business and have signed their offer. I figured once we're back, we could sell one or both of our places and buy a nice motor coach and travel for a while and find a place that we would really like to spend the rest of our lives living together there. What would you say to that?" She stood up, walked over to me, so I scooted my chair back and she sat in my lap and put her arms around my neck and, giving me a smile that filled my heart with joy, said, "Michael, at times I wish we could have met sooner, but then we wouldn't have appreciated one another as much as we do now. You are the most wonderful man a woman could ever want. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Just remember, we still need some outside interests, so it's got to be someplace close enough for us to enjoy the things both of us like to do. I want us to be happy, but if we're tied together 24/7, I'm pretty sure our attitude will change. Tell me, what would you like to do? What hobbies do you have, or what would you like to do once you're retired?" I already knew that answer and said, "I want to rebuild muscle cars, you know, the high-performance cars from the mid-60s to early 70s. Tear them apart and make them just like new or even better. Then we could go to car shows or just take a drive around town or out in the country. I loved working on cars when I was in high school with my Uncle Dave. So what would you like to do?" Cassie bashfully said, "I hope you don't think it's silly, but I would love to take up painting again. I had started when I was in college. I'd go out and take a bunch of pictures of something or someone I wanted to paint. Then I would attach the pictures all around the easel and begin painting. By the time I graduated, I was getting pretty good. At least I thought so. So I entered a local art exhibition. Of my 5 entries, 1 got a 2nd place and 1 a 4th. But once I started working, then meeting my future husband, there never seemed to be enough time for me to go back to what I really love doing." "I guess we have a deal," Michael said with a smile. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.